Hi everybody, Dana Sparks, Director of the Real Estate Academy of America and qualifying broker of the Maximum One Greater Atlanta Realtors, bringing you another video in the series, the ongoing series on the 2023 changes to the Georgia Association of Realtors, or GAR, contract forms, contract package. So please watch the other videos in this series. Check out the playlist 2023 GAR contract and check out our classes offered by the Real Estate Academy of America and hosted by Maximum One Realty companies throughout the state of Georgia. We are teaching these classes virtually and in person at various Maximum One company branches, taught by our brokers, by our instructors, as well as by our affiliated closing attorneys. So come check those out. We'd love to see you and love to see you on a class. These classes are being taught throughout December of 2022 and January and February of 2023. I'll link the calendar below. So I am recording this video in December of 2022. And in continuing on with the series, today I want to talk about the changes that the Georgia Association of Realtors made to the temporary occupancy agreement. They made quite a few changes, and let's just dive in. Let me explain to you. Let's go over what those are. So again, this is the temporary occupancy agreement for the seller after closing. Temporary occupancy agreement for seller after closing exhibit. GAR form F219. And again, I'm not going to go over all the ins and outs of this exhibit. I really just want to highlight to you the changes for 2023. And again, there are a lot of them. And in essence, what it is doing is, as you know, or should know, or realize, is as of closing, the buyer is now the owner of the property, and the seller no longer owns that property, but is staying in the property, has temporary occupancy of the property for a short period of time, not to extend 60 days. It does not create a lease. Why do you not want to lease? We don't want to lease for a couple reasons. Number one, there's a whole nother body of laws that kick in. The Georgia landlord-tenant laws would kick in if it's an actual lease. The other reason we don't want to lease is the buyer typically has, generally speaking, there could be exceptions, but generally speaking, the buyer has gotten an owner-occupant loan from a lender to purchase the property if they got a loan, and not an investor loan. So there's a couple of reasons that we don't want a lease. Nevertheless, the agreement is by virtue of between the buyer and the seller on this temporary occupancy agreement. If, however, the seller, who no longer owns the house, stays in the property after the negotiated time frame, they are referred to legally as a tenant at sufferance, and a buyer would potentially have to go through the full eviction process and procedures through magistrate court to get that seller out if they don't come to an agreement. But that's just generally speaking. But in and of itself, this agreement is not a lease. I'm not going to go on anymore. I just want to bring to you the changes. But again, the seller is now no longer owns the house. So at closing, there was a sentence in there in 2022 that at closing, the seller is to give the buyer, who now owns the house, a set of keys to the property. And then at time of possession, the seller is to turn over everything. All remaining keys, door openers, codes, blah, blah, blah. For 2023, it has changed, and it now says, at time of closing, sellers shall provide buyer with one set of keys, door openers, codes, and other similar equipment needed to access the property. At time of closing, sellers shall turn over all the remaining keys, door openers, so forth and so on. So that is one change, is that not only is the seller obligated to give the buyer / new owner a key, but door opener, so forth and so on. Additionally, they have added some verbiage to paragraph 8 of the temporary occupancy agreement that adds additional responsibilities for the seller to maintain the property while the seller is occupying the property. And it states, paragraph 8, I want to make sure we're still recording. It states, paragraph 8, this has always been there. It says sellers shall be liable for the expenses of repairing any damage to the property caused by the seller or the seller's family members, licensees, and invitees, excluding normal wear and tear. Buyer, as the new owner, shall be responsible for making all other repairs to the property. That's been there. What's getting added on to that paragraph for 2023 states, notwithstanding the above, the seller agrees to continue to perform all routine maintenance during the seller's temporary occupancy of the property, including, by way of example only, cutting the grass, keeping the property clean and free of trash and debris, maintaining the pool chemicals and changing filters, changing filters, light bulbs, and batteries as needed. Seller shall promptly report to buyer any obvious needs for maintenance or repairs to the property. Then there is a brand new paragraph 9, which goes through the rights of the buyer, who's the new owner, right to access the property. So brand new paragraph 9 in the temporary occupancy agreement for seller after closing exhibit states, upon 24 hours advance notice to the seller, buyer and buyer's representatives shall have the right Monday through Saturday from 9 a.m. to 8 p.m. and Sunday from 1 p.m. to 6 p.m. to access the property, to inspect, repair, and maintain the property. In addition, the buyer and buyer's representatives may enter the property at any time to investigate potential emergencies. Evidence of water leaks, fire, smoke, foul odors, sounds indicating the possibility of an injured person or animal, and other similar evidence of an emergency shall be sufficient grounds for the buyer and buyer's representatives to enter the property for this purpose. Now, getting back to the section about, well, what happens? So in this exhibit, buyer and seller negotiate the length of time that the buyer, new owner, is willing to allow the seller to stay in the property. Then there is a paragraph about what happens if the seller doesn't leave when they say they were going to leave. So already existing in 2022, this has been in there, and it states, if the seller does not timely vacate the property by the end of the temporary occupancy agreement, the seller shall be deemed to be a tenant at sufferance and shall be unlawfully holding over, shall be subject to being evicted, and shall pay the buyer holdover rent during the period in which the seller is holding over in the amount of X amount of dollars per day for each day after the end of the temporary occupancy period that the seller remains in the property. That's been there. That's not changed. What is now, in addition to that, for 2023, it states the holdover rent. Again, it's not referenced as regular rent because it's not an actual lease with 60 days notice, so forth and so on. So it's not a lease. So it's holdover rent, not rent per a lease. The holdover rent is intended to partially compensate the buyer for losses, damages, and expenses, including delaying buyer's possession and the additional cost to move associated with that delay, or the ability to secure a replacement tenant, or causing a sales transaction to be terminated or postponed. If the buyer incurs additional costs due to the delay or loses a prospective tenant or sales transaction because the seller fails to vacate the property upon the expiration of this temporary occupancy agreement, then the seller will be liable for such damages as the buyer can prove because of the seller's wrongful failure to vacate. This is important. This means, so the amount that is filled in as holdover rent, that's one per diem. That is one amount. But if the buyer who now owns the property can demonstrate and prove additional financial damages because the seller didn't leave when they said they were going to, the buyer is now liable for those additional expenses. But you buyers who now own the property, you need to be able to keep track and be able to prove your additional financial losses. But you sellers who are staying in the property, after you said you would leave, there might be additional financial costs to that. And then there is an admonition at the end to both buyers and sellers. And I am so grateful that GAR has added this, because as professional agents, we always advise our clients of what happens with insurance. The buyer now owns the property. So the buyer now has hazard insurance on the structure in and of itself. The seller, who used to own the property, is now in essence just an occupant. They no longer have insurance on the property. So what about their stuff? What about their personal property? In essence, they need to make sure that their personal possessions are insured. And I know as great real estate agents that all of you are watching this channel, I know that you guys have had this discussion with your buyers and sellers regarding this in a temporary occupancy situation. But GAR has just disclosed this in writing on this exhibit as a reminder to our public, as well as a reminder for you, the agent, to have this as a talking point with your clients and customers. So it is a brand new paragraph 15. It is in all caps, and it does reference property insurance for the structure versus the contents. And what it states is, prior to the commencement of this temporary occupancy period, buyer and seller are advised to consult with their respective property insurance agents to confirm that their real and personal property, as the case may be, real property would be for the buyer that now owns the structure, personal property would be for the seller that's just occupying it. So confirm that their real and personal property, as the case may be, will be insured during the temporary occupancy of the property. That's it. What do you think? You like those changes? Puts a little bit more responsibility on the seller, who is now the occupant of the property and no longer owns the home. Gives some additional access rights to the buyer, who is now the owner. There are some financial implications. The reason they put that in there is there potentially was a situation where it was cheaper for a seller to stay in the house at the per diem rate that they negotiated for holdover rent, rather than going to find temporary housing somewhere until they could close on a new house or had other arrangements. Well, now it's not just a dollar amount that might be cheaper than an expensive hotel or an extended stay place or an Airbnb or something like that. Now there could be pretty costly additional financial repercussions to a seller who fails to timely vacate, based on actual financial damages that a buyer who now owns the property could experience if the seller doesn't get out when they said they were going to get out. So again, comment below. I'd love to hear what you think about the changes to the 2023 temporary occupancy agreement, and would love to hear your experiences with this. Thank you guys so much for watching. Dana Sparks, Director of the Real Estate Academy of America and qualifying broker of Maximum One Greater Atlanta Realtors, satisfying your needs with service, information, and hopefully education. Thank you guys so much for watching. Bye. If you like that video, check out the one here. If you like the content on this entire channel, please click here to subscribe. I try to take even the most complicated of real estate situations and make them crystal clear. See what I did there? Real estate made crystal clear. Thank you guys so much for watching.